Confidence is not a fluke, confidence is a choice, and it begins with our mindset. In this podcast, you will find a variety of research-proven strategies that will lead you from being self-critical, your worst enemy, to being the most confident version of yourself. I am Olga, former therapist, confidence life coach, blissfully an IVF mother, a wife, and this is the Journey to Happy podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Journey to Happy podcast. Today, I am in the company of two great humans who are going to talk to me about how to support families and children in grief. Not a subject that we love talking about, yet one that it's so important that we talk about. And I know that for me, my personal experience, I often get clients asking me, how can I explain to my family what I need? So we're all three professionals who have some experience working in the field of grief, bereavement. Some of us have experienced it firsthand ourselves. And we wanted to come together to bring to you this episode to provide your families, your children, some tools and supports that we think are helpful when it comes to just coming together, gathering supports when somebody has lost somebody that they love. So I am going to be talking to Carol and Katt. They both work at the Roger Neilson House, which is our local palliative care unit for our children's hospital. So they get to work with families in and out who have experienced what in my books is the worst loss to have experienced, which is the loss of a child. And they do incredible work. Just before we started talking, Carol showed me some lights that a client of hers had given her that with the reflection of the light create like these little rainbows all over her office space. And I was nearly in tears thinking that, like she said, they represent all the little angels that she's had the privilege to know of or know herself. And so definitely the work that these ladies do is not an easy work, yet is so honorable. And I'm so excited that they're here to share with me and with you guys listening. Stick around. I know it's not the favorite subject to listen to, yet none of us is ever exempt from knowing somebody who has lost somebody, whether that's a child or not. And I think this conversation will be important. And if you think of other people who could benefit from listening to this conversation, by all means, share this episode with them. So, Carol and Katt, welcome to my podcast. We have worked together. I've seen you in other settings, and now it's happy to be the one inviting you over to talk to my people. Why don't we just begin briefly by introducing ourselves? So maybe, Carol, do you want to go first? And then Katt, you can just follow Carol.
Sure. So I'm Carol Openshaw, and I am one of 4 social workers that we now have at Roger Neilson House. And I've been there for about 10 years and have worked almost entirely that time working with parents who are either anticipating grieving their child or who are grieving their child. And more recently, I've been really honing in the perinatal population and developing our perinatal bereavement program. And we've been doing that for the past 6 years or so. So over to Katt now, though, to let us know who she is.
So my name is Katt Brooks. I'm a registered recreation therapist at Roger Neilson House. And I always say that I work here a little bit longer than Carol because I was here as a student, but we pretty much started at the exact same time. I work with all the children that come in and out of our facility. So children who are ill with an illness and helping them deal with anticipatory death and grief and their siblings. And I support children who have had a brother or sister die in grief and bereavement afterward.
Every time I hear you guys describe what you do, I have to take like 3 deep inhales and think like, oh my God, thank you for doing the work that you do. But also, what brought you to wanting to do this work? It seems like the work that everybody will be like, no, thank you, I'll pass. That's too emotional. Can you guys just briefly tell us like what moved you to doing this work? What made you feel like strongly, because you have to be so strongly passionate. And I happen to know both of you professionally, knowing that you are really so passionate about what you do. Like nobody had to, you were not forcing to this line of work. You landed here intentionally. Why? What brought you there?
I think for me, there was very much like almost like a fate aspect to it. I kind of fell into Roger Neilson House. I had been working at CHEO for a period of time and the position became available. And I thought, it's really hard. I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this, but what an incredible challenge. And I had already a huge passion for working with medically complex children. So I thought, I'll do it for 2 years because they deserve at least a 2-year commitment. Then I'll reevaluate and, probably go back to CHEO. And I have never worked in a job as long as this one for exactly those reasons. I'm completely passionate about bereavement work and adore working with our families. It's so incredible to walk alongside somebody to a point where they start seeing hope again. And of course, to know these children is a once in a lifetime experience. So there's no work more rewarding. Very difficult, definitely. And I've had to do a lot of work in learning how to cope with my own emotions, but wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said this like fate aspect. Like I totally remember like looking at a list of job applications and seeing Roger Neilson House and seeing that it was like a children's hospice. And I remember looking at it and being like, whoa, like it felt right. But in that moment, I was like, no, I'm not ready right now. Like I need to do, I don't know, I need a little bit of time. And then I remember a year later, I saw the same job posting again and applied. And yeah, I was right. I came here and I remember working in other places with like seniors or adults and just, I enjoyed every day, but working with kids in this setting, even though it's so sad and so difficult, working with kids in bereavement and grief, like every day drew me back. And every day I like, yes, you experience something sad and difficult a lot of days, but then other days you walk in and just experience something so difficult. And then another kid comes and runs and hugs you and somehow supports you through this thing you didn't even tell them about. So I had this internal fate that has stuck, I guess, for both of us, because we both have been here for so long.
I was going to say my experience is that the staff has been there for a long time. It's not one of these jobs where you see that they're constantly looking to replace people because the people in the job couldn't do it longer. Like you guys are like, I almost feel like it's a family. I've known you guys. You've been there for a while. And I would like to add that I was also brought there by fate. And I just felt like I couldn't say no when the invitation came to give a talk to, I think it was a bereavement group the first time I came to talk. In my list of jobs that I will never want to do was dying children or children who died. Like in my emotional vulnerability, that felt like I just couldn't possibly even begin to think about it. And then when that invitation came in, I had just opened my private practice and I was so open to just letting people know what I do and understanding how much mindfulness could help. I just couldn't say no. And so I was there thinking, oh God, please let me do this. Please let me just not break down and like I've been doing here, already crying a few times. That's just who I am, very, very sensitive. And I felt something, you probably would agree with me. It's the opposite of whatever your mind tells you. If your mind tells you it's going to be so hard that it breaks you, it's so hard, but the people in the room carry with them such a strength. Do you feel that way? Like, do you feel that these parents, these children are just, it's almost like this is their wisdom, their inner wisdom, their destiny, where they're supposed to be. And the entire existence is just so, it brings so much strength that I always walk away from my talks feeling energized. Yes, having had all the emotions, but ultimately with so much power, like I had witnessed so much power. And that, I don't know if you guys feel that way, but I would imagine that there is some of that for you in your work, that you see the resiliency, the power of love, like what happens to these parents as they actually do grieve. And like Carol was saying, see hope again.
I think one thing that's important to acknowledge if we're going to talk about grief is that grief is a human experience. We will all live grief at some point in our lives. Hopefully it's not the grief of the loss of a child, but we will lose something. And so if we acknowledge that it's a human experience, we need to have language around it. We need to have an ability to care for one another. The people I've come to know at Roger Neilson House are like the depth of soul of the people I work with. You know, you made that reference to family. Absolutely, we've become like family. Like I've worked with Katt for 10 years. we've seen so much happen in each other's lives over the past 10 years. We've experienced loss of colleagues in the past 10 years. So I think that you can't help but turn to one another, learn from one another, lean on one another. And yeah, a lot of the learning too that we get is from the families. It is from the children. It is from the parents. Our parents of children who are medically complex and dying, they have to have resiliency because they have no other choice, right? Mm-hmm. The only other choice is to not continue parenting. And that's not an option. They keep going. So yeah, there's an inherent strength there. They probably wouldn't refer to themselves as strong because they don't feel that way. But on the outside looking in, that's what we see, right? And then I would say in my work with the perinatal families, oftentimes I'm working with young couples who maybe they haven't experienced significant trauma yet. And the first trauma that they live is losing a baby. It completely alters the path of their lives, right? So being able to help them know that it will be okay is mind-blowingly powerful and wonderful.
And I want to just rescue the power word because they wouldn't use it that way. And the reason I brought it up is because I know the family going through grief, especially of their baby or their child, the last thing they think is that they're coping well. Mm-hmm. They just think like there is no, and because we want people who are listening here to think about this. When I talk to relatives of people who are dying or who are supporting people who are in grief because they have lost somebody, is always lean into their power, into their strength, believe for them, even if they don't see it. Can you please begin to see their strength and behave around them like they are the strongest people that you've ever met? Because I this is my personal. You guys can chip in and say what your thoughts are. I feel that we all feel so awkward around the people who have lost somebody, especially a child, that we end up worrying about them more so than believing in their resiliency, in their strength. And in that exchange of behavior, we might end up doing the wrong thing that the family does not appreciate in some, the least helpful of things. So that's why I think it's an important point to bring forward is that those in grief need support but they also have everything that it takes with the supports within themselves to see this through, to get through it.
One of the things I hear most from families is, my entire world feels like it's fallen apart. People have expectations of me to get better more quickly. I hate the word better, by the way, because it's not about getting better. You're living now a new normal. And you know what? If you put pants on today and got up and had a shower, bravo. Good for you for doing that. And, we need to keep our expectations reasonable. And people around you need to know that, yeah, you might be different and you might seem different for a period of time. You might not talk about the same things. You might not seem happy. And that's very reasonable, very much to be expected and okay. And to be able to sit in it with someone is the most incredible gift you can give them. Mm-hmm. I often say, I've never been skydiving, but Olga, you went skydiving this weekend? I'd love you to tell me about that. Tell me about that experience. Tell me about what you learned. Tell me about, every moment. Why is it any different with grief? Mm-hmm. You just lived this experience. I want to listen. Tell me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was going to say, when we were talking about the resiliency, I think over the past couple, the past 7 or 8 years of my work here, like working with siblings and children in death and dying, like one of my biggest advocacy pieces is about allowing those children to be a part of that experience. And we, Carol and I, time and time again, get so blown away about what, in addition to what adults can do during these periods of time, what kids can do, and how a sibling can sit by the bedside for days on end, holding someone's hand, decorating their room, writing cards, like legacy pieces for their brother or sister, like telling their story that you never expected. And so much of our society puts them in a box that they shouldn't be there as well, right? And it's just amazing to be able to see that, and that if we give kids this power, that they can do that. There was another point that you talked about, Carol, too, about relationships. And I find because Carol and I present together about siblings and adults all the time too. And so often we're like, yeah, that's the same thing with kids too. But relationships too is such a like crazy things for kids too, that are trying to figure out when they're not developmentally in a place where an adult is. So trying to figure out their friendships, like how do I talk to my friend about my brother or sister dying? They don't get it. They don't get why they don't get it too. Or how do you still have the same relationship with your parent when you're afraid to make them cry or afraid to make them sad, right? Like, yeah, so interesting.
I want to say, going back to why we wouldn't openly or intuitively ask somebody in grief, you just went through this, or your child is dying, let's talk about it. Let me listen to. And I think of myself 7 years ago, like before I got that first invitation, how I would have run away from any case that was the case because of my own anxieties, my own fears, how I didn't want to go there because I was not emotionally mature enough to like talk about this without going into a full panic mode, or just like I just cried, Katt, listening to you saying how the siblings like hold a hand. Like I can't even repeat it because I'm going to start crying. And for so many of us, crying, we're so allergic to showing that emotion, to showing that sympathy, to showing that like, holy shit, this is hard. We have this image that if we cannot show up as like the strongest support, then we shouldn't show up at all. And let's not even talk about it, which is why I really wanted to hone into how much power and resiliency there is within those siblings and those parents and those dying children. They are like the wisest of their own life experience. And so if we can begin to understand our own difficult emotions about their scenario, how we feel about it, and be courageous enough to be present to the best of our ability, understanding that they are powerful, that you're not there to give them power, that they've got all the power, but you're there to not make them feel alone, to just be a presence. You know, how often people are asking me, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Like,
say that. Say that. I don't know what to say.
Exactly. That's a thing to say. Like, listen, I wish I could say something. I have no idea what to say. I've never been here before. We kind of know what to say when somebody offers us something. Our parents drill that down, say no, thank you, or yes, thank you. Like, thank you is the word when you say it. We've practiced that, but nobody has been telling us throughout our childhood and our adult life, this is what you say when somebody is in a moment of deep grief. We all freeze. We're like, oh God, what? You know, and then
I think at the heart of that, Olga, too, is that there's a need to want to make the person feel better. So you search,
like you were saying,
you see them in pain. So you search for something that might take some of that pain away, because that's our natural instinct. We need to fix this. We're a fix-it society, rather than you're in pain. Let me hear about that. Right. And so inevitably then what comes out of our mouths is things like, well, you can always have another baby. They're with God now, or they're an angel. That should bring you comfort.
They're in a better place.
In a better place.
Like, better than my arms? Are you kidding me?
Better than your arms. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I think at the heart of it is this fear. It's all fear-based. I'm scared that I might hurt you more. Well, there's nothing that's going to hurt you more than what you've just lived, right? Yeah. Nothing that comes out of my mouth. I'm scared that I might make you cry, or I feel like I made them cry. Well, they were probably crying before you got there. They will be probably crying in 2 hours from now. And, they'll be crying tomorrow. So you didn't make them cry. You allowed yourself to be vulnerable and to be there with them while they were crying. And how amazing is that? You might be scared that you're going to cry. Wow, you have emotion and you're showing it. That's beautiful. I had so many, I'm the queen of having my eyes well up. Katt will tell you this. My eyes well up like all the time. They've probably already happened 3 times today. And parents will say, I can tell that you actually care about me and you actually care about my child because you show emotion.
And you listened.
How many times have I cried, Carol, as a guest speaker at your groups as soon as they finish introducing their angels? Like, it's impossible. And I don't apologize anymore. I'm like, I'm just going to take a moment to process what I just heard. And I process things through tears and words. So I will take that. And I don't think, you saying what families has made you think. I just want everybody to think about it in your hardest of times. has it been a solution that has made you feel heard, supported, and like hugged? Or has it been sometimes just knowing that, oh shit, they feel my pain? Like I can see that there is an emotion on that other side, like that other person, because often, like Carol said, we don't want to seem weak, or like I had people say, like, you're the one who needs consoling and here I am crying to you. You know what? There's some comfort in that. Like, you understand how my heart feels right now. So not that I want to like, I don't feel like I need to comfort you is what I'm saying. When you do break down into tears, and if that was your worst fear, just know that person is going to they know that you know they're feeling, or sort of know they're feeling. And that's such a beautiful thing to connect to.
And the most important thing, I think, is them being heard, right? And they want to say their baby's name. They want to talk about them, right? And no matter if it's a kid or an adult, like being able to share stories and memories and the sadness you feel about that is so important.
A repetitive theme for the families I've supported is their fear of their child being forgotten, which is something that I would have never thought of before I entered this field, that I would think maybe it's inappropriate to mention their baby. Like, you never know whether the family wants to mention their name. Now I operate on the basis that they will let me know if they don't want me to mention their child anymore, that they will let me know. But I have heard so many moms in that fear, like, I don't want my child to be forgotten. Why are the grandparents not mentioning him or her? Mm-hmm. Why is nobody saying, like, this would have been his birthday today? That I think is so important for anybody listening here, wanting to support somebody who's passed, who's experiencing the grief of somebody who's passed, child or not a child. It could be your mom, it could be your sibling, to mention that person. That person is alive in our memories, right? Like, they had a legacy, they left a legacy.
It's such a gift to give to someone, right? It's such a gift to give to someone, to tell them that you are remembering 5 years later, 10 years later, right? I can speak from my personal experience. I lost my mom at a young age. And although not the same as child loss, it was my entry into the world of bereavement and grief, and was a significant loss for me. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I still have people reach out through Facebook, or, somebody remembers a memory and makes a comment to me, or, and it's such an amazing thing to know that my mother was not forgotten, isn't forgotten, certainly not forgotten for myself. And it feels good. So the same applies for our families, right? In the early stages of grieving, many parents will talk about a fear that they themselves will forget. Yeah. And I reassure them that that's impossible.
It's impossible.
Impossible.
I think it's cool about the facility that we work at as well, Carol and I, because we interact with children sometimes for years, and we get to know them. And years later, we see parents, and we're able to tell them stories of interactions we had with their children. And to be able to share that memory, I think to see that reaction on their face, Carol, I think is the most joyful but memorable connection that you could ever experience with someone. It's like what you're saying with the Facebook.
Yeah. I had an experience. Sorry, let me just share this because it's kind of neat. Just yesterday, I had a package delivered to me at my front door. And when I went to pick up the package, the delivering post lady was one of my former parents.
Really?
Yeah. And I said, "Oh my gosh, it's so-and-so's mom, look at you." And then we had this exchange, and she had a big smile on her face, and she's doing great. And and we had this opportunity to talk about her daughter, right? It's so special for her. So the people always come out of nowhere.
Yeah, I like to, Carol, what you said, so-and-so's mother. I know you just said so-and-so, but, or your big sister, your big brother. I feel like that labeling is so important too. And it never goes away, that they want to be like that mother, that brother, that sister, that father, right?
Yeah. In fact, on a work call, when the package arrived with our director, and I said, "Oh my gosh," I said, "Megan, it's so-and-so. She's delivering my mail." Anyway, so we all had a good laugh.
So for people listening to us, obviously we have a certain level of comfort now that we've acquired. You guys have been doing this for 11 years. I have been doing it on a sort of regular basis, thanks to you guys. I went once and then it never let me go. And it is in the highlights of my year is when I get to come to your groups and talk. even though sometimes I feel like I need to take the rest of the day off to just breathe through and be like, holy mackerel, so many emotions to process. I want to go back to you should be healing faster. Because I think as the support people around our loved ones, I see this with a loving heart. My husband, like we grieve differently. And my husband has, like Carol was saying, a fixing, like he's got to solve the problem. Like that's his job in life. Nobody's suffering. Everybody's good. My crew is well if I'm taking care of them. And I think that that's not unique to him. Carol, you mentioned it, like that there's an innate desire to help the people that are suffering. And sometimes we want that process to be fast because we have a level of discomfort to seeing our loved one in pain. So I know for my husband, when he sees me crying for too long, then he's like, you want to watch a movie? Like he does even that with my son. Try to like get him out of the crying moment. Whereas I'm like, let him cry until he's done crying. Like we don't have to have an allergy to sadness. Let's just let the person get to, nobody is going to be sad forever. Eventually we all come out of that. We see the light at the end of the tunnel, especially if we are well supported and if we're given permission to feel that emotion. So what kind of tips of advice do we have for relatives who may be seeing a sibling losing their child, who have their own set of emotions, and who would absolutely love to that be like a turn page? We're now here. That was then. Because that's most people, when you go through this traumatic event, you just want to wake up from that bad dream and somebody to tell you it didn't happen. I've recently experienced 2 sudden deaths of friends of my husband, random deaths. And when I woke up after each of those knowledge of that human had passed away, I really, truly wanted somebody to tell me it was a mistake. They actually hadn't died. Like they were still here. I think it's a normal reaction that we just want to pretend that awful thing didn't happen. And hence the rushing for people to heal. What do you guys usually advise people? What will be the best advice that we can leave as our legacy in this episode?
I always tell my families, because families will also have expectations of themselves. Well, why aren't I feeling better yet? Yeah. Right? Again, better. Hate that word. Anyway, because it implies illness, right? When you say I need to get better, it's because I'm sick. Well, grief is not illness. Grief is an incredibly important part of life that, again, we will all live at some point. So grief is not linear. It doesn't start at the bottom and end at the top. It's like the visual that people expect, because most things in our life follow this kind of trajectory, especially when we are part of the 5-year plan community, right? A lot of us have a 5-year plan for our lives. So if you can understand that it doesn't do this and that it's messy, grief work is the messiest work you'll do. It doesn't follow a path. It isn't predictable. One day you're great. The next day you're completely triggered by something that's happened that there was no way you could know that was going to happen. You need to develop a comfort level around the messiness. Mm-hmm. So, and what might take one person a few months to resolve, because perhaps, and when I say a few months to resolve, I mean the acute grief, right? When you're in the real thick of it, because grief is also lifelong. It doesn't ever truly resolve. It comes back and it reappears at unfortunate times. But once that acute grief, for some people, might take a few months to work through, that might take another person 2 years to work through, is because of all kinds of factors, other stuff going on in their lives, previous coping that they had learned. Maybe this is someone who's really well versed in mindfulness, right? And so they brought with them to their trauma a working toolkit of things that are helpful, right? So families need to know nothing that they will do will fix it. The work has to come from the person themselves. And with really good support and guidance, they will get to a place where they can acknowledge that they are feeling hopeful again and accepting of their new normal.
So as a relative, if I think this person is not doing well enough, that they should be supported, what is the best way of suggesting this without coming as like, I'm fixing you?
I would say the best thing to do is to say, how are you feeling? I've noticed you've been crying more lately, and I love you. How are you feeling? Is there more that I can do? Right? If we take the judgment out of it and put it back on the person to identify where they think they're at, because I think we've just mentioned this as well. We're all different. Some of us are criers, some of us are not criers. And for some reason, people think that we can evaluate someone's wellness by the amount of tears they shed. And if that were the case, Olga, you and I would be screwed, right? We're clearly deeply in grief.
I wouldn't have the license to leave my house then. I'll be like,
right? Everyone is different. So have the person know that they're loved, that you want to do what's best for them, that they think what's best, and ask them what they think they need.
Katt, sorry I interrupted you, but I wanted to make sure that we can support the people listening in knowing how to bring up something supportive without coming across from like your timeline for healing has expired. Where are you? Yeah.
And it's interesting because this idea of a linear aspect of healing transcends to children as well, that they believe that that's the way that our world, our society, the way that we should heal too. Where in reality, children are, I always have to explain to parents, are these ginormous puddle jumpers where like you'll tell them or disclose difficult information, they might cry. And then 2 seconds later, they'll be on the jungle gym, like jumping up and down, like super, super happy. And that's the way they experience grief, is they'll be fine 1 second. And then 2 seconds later, something will go wrong and they'll explode an emotion that is resonating in the grief that they experienced. And it's interesting, like working with some children for so long, I find that if I worked with them when they were younger, and recently I've interacted with some kids 5 years out of their grief. And developmentally, now they're in a different place to deal with their grief, that it's come up even bigger. And they're trying to be a young adult and learn how to be a young adult and bring their sibling into their life as they're creating new relationships. And how do they define themselves in that? And then they feel guilt and emotion about that too. So we kind of explain kids as being like onions, like that they are experiencing a layer of grief, but as they get older and develop, they understand an added layer of their grief, and they have to deal with it in that emotion too. And so it's just being present for our kids and knowing that the same idea, I say the exact same thing to parents and kids about having the conversation, is if we see our child isn't doing well, you can say, I noticed that you're being a little bit more emotional this week. Is there something that you'd like to talk about? Or if someone is working with them exteriorly, I noticed that mom and dad are really emotional this week. I'm wondering how you feel about this, or I'm wondering why you think that is. And creating a space, especially as being this outside family member, outside provider for these children, to ask them what they're thinking, because often they're like, oh, well, my mom is really emotional about my brother who died 5 years ago because today's his birthday. And I feel really sad about it too, but I'm too scared to tell her. And you being that external person can be that support to give that child a voice.
You said a few things that I want to bring back. One thing is the developmental staging. And so how their brains are not even fully developed, right? And so as their brain develops, they need to reorganize that loss, that identity of themselves with a sibling who have been lost, or a parent who has been lost, like Carol was mentioning. And the other aspect that I am curious about, children are not always, grown-ups are not always able to say, oh, I lost my shit because of the grief that I had 5 years ago. And this tiny incident just reminded me of it all. I have this funny story I'll tell you because it was so significant for me. I'm driving full of hormones. I had just had a loss of a failed IVF, which is a baby, didn't make it. We worked so hard for that to get to that point. And I'm on another cycle trying for another baby. And I'm on the driveway to a Tim Hortons, a place that I never go because they literally don't sell anything that I can eat. But I'm full of hormones and that doesn't matter. And I order a bagel, with a specific bagel with cream cheese. I'm celiac. I don't eat gluten, but that's what I wanted. And no rules mattered to me that day. And I make it to the window and they said, you know that thing you wanted, the bagel? Actually, we don't have it. And they had nothing to give me. I lost it. I had to park my car and cry my eyes out. Called my husband and he was like, did you get into an accident? Are you okay? I'm like, I went to Tim Hortons. They said they had what I wanted, but when I made it to the window, they didn't have what I wanted. And it wasn't until I described it that way that I realized, holy shit, I just relived my loss. I went to a fertility clinic. I paid for a treatment. They said I could make a baby. I, in fact, made a baby. And then I was empty-handed. Where is my baby? I had an incredible amount of self-awareness and mindfulness, which made me realize within just talking, like, ooh, this is what just happened. And suddenly I had so much compassion for my experience. And I knew I wasn't crying about the bagel. I was really crying about the loss of my baby. Children don't have that capacity. Adults don't have that capacity. From the outside, we might see it, even if we're not therapists, we're just a relative. And we're like, oh, I don't think this is about the glass of water. I think this is about something else. How do you guys suggest that this is approached? Should it be approached? Do we help people make these connections as an outside Joe who's just looking in and thinking like, wow, you're catastrophizing something because there is something deeper. How can I open space for you?
A lot of the work that we do is helping children to learn emotional literacy. So taking life events that you can see within your life when you're with a child and seeing an emotion in something and someone playing games with it where they can learn emotional literacy. I teach parents in that capacity that the most valuable lesson we can teach children is when we are being emotional, to teach them, to explain to them what we are feeling, and that will teach them for in future what that means in their own life as well too. So if we are feeling sad one day, oh, mommy is feeling sad today because of this, and that's why I look a little bit more emotional. Would you like to have some cuddle time with me or something like that? But then those little questions too of noticing and then allowing a child to reflect that I'm noticing this behavior in you. I'm wondering, what's that about? Or have you been thinking about your sibling lately, and creating that space? And when we are teaching them by like focusing on these little things that we notice in their behavior or in their interactions with us, then we can help them to identify what it might be.
And just before, Carol, before we jump into you, just because you're bringing this up, I'm thinking of a mom who may have children whose dad passed away, or a dad whose moms have passed away. And so collectively, everybody might be sad at Christmas, specifically at her birthday, at his birthday, at a moment. And you're saying some children are so perceptive and they can tell our parents is sad, so I'm not going to share my emotion. How can a parent listening to us who may have children who are like collectively in grief address that with their children so that they feel permission to be sad at the same time as their parent?
So I love the point that you said about our children just knowing and being innate. Like, our children are specialists in this, and in us, they read us like a book, and they know when we're good, they know when we're bad, right? So creating that platform by acknowledging, yes, I'm feeling emotion today and I'm feeling sad, but it never means that I will not listen to what you will say. And it never means that I love you less. It never means that I won't be here for you. I just need a little time right now. And then let's make time together to have a time to talk about this. But nothing that is happening in mommy or daddy is ever going to take away from us loving you or creating a space for you to be able to talk to us about what you feel.
So still verbalizing your emotions and kind of letting them also say and share. Because I would want to be giving permission from my parent to also be sad, because they want to protect you too, right? Like, they're like, I don't want you to be more sad than what you already are.
And that's what we hear from parents the most is, I don't want to cry or show emotion in front of my child because I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to make them more sad. But it's like what we said in the beginning. This is an awful, sad, tragic situation. We're all sad. So couldn't we be sad together? So in a reasonable amount, as long as you're not on the floor, like, whatever. Carol and I say that both for adults and kids, but as long as you are showing an emotion in a reasonable way that you can explain it to your child, why not feel that emotion together?
Right. I love it. Thank you, Carol. I interrupted you, but I wanted to make that connection for them.
Yeah. I just want to bring it back to the bagels for a minute. Olga, I'm wondering if your husband went out and bought you bagels.
He
fixed it.
You want to know what he did? He found the nearest Tim Hortons to where I was, called them, and then called me and said, they do have that bagel there. At which point I had done my own reasoning, and I'm like, I don't really want a bagel. I want a baby. And so, I was able to make a better choice, because actually having had that bagel was a self-harming choice for me because of being celiac. And I was able to like, this is why I love mindfulness, because you get distracted in other things that your mind think that's the problem. But when you can bring it back to what it is, you can then actually do the healing and give yourself the support that you need for what actually needs to be supported.
To your original question, and I was kind of joking about the bagels, but also kind of like everything I said earlier applies to the scenario now, right? Like everything. So if you are seeing a connect, sit down with your friend, sit down with your family member and sort of, share your reflections. I think it's important that people not feel like they need to play psychologist or therapist or social worker, because, even though you might be seeing something, if that person's not ready to see that yet, it's maybe not the best thing to do. But what you can do is, again, ask those open-ended questions, right? How are you feeling? What do you think's happening right now? If you really think about it, like, why do you think you got so upset about the bagel? Right. And kind of do it that way. I also want to say, really bring it back to basics. Some of the most helpful things that you can do for families when they are acutely grieving is don't make the offer of, well, if you need something, let me know.
Yeah. Nobody's going to like, I need something. Yeah.
Biggest complaint parents have. They're like, I don't even know what I need. What am I, and I'm going to ask you to do this? I don't know what I need. Offer concrete support. If there's living siblings, offer to babysit so that the parent can get out for a walk for the afternoon. Offer to go pick up groceries, right? One of our moms says one of the most helpful things that happened when she was acutely grieving was her good friend showed up and said, I don't know what else to give you. And I don't know what else to do, but I figured you probably don't want to go out and get toilet paper, and you probably don't want to go out and get, X, Y, Z. So here's some of these things, and I'll come back in a week with more. And then they went away. And her friend felt the love. She knew that they couldn't be there for her as an emotional support, but damn it, she was going to make sure their basic needs were met.
Love it. So I recently got an email, very unfortunate email, from a friend of ours who lost their pregnancy really late in pregnancy. And so it was a meal train. And we have so there's a whole calendar for a full month. Everybody is taking a meal that we're either making or an Uber gift card or something, so that for a full month, they don't have to cook. It seems so small upon the loss of a child, but it's also so big when you can be fed and not even think about it, right? Like,
but I would, to back onto that, once that month is up, then what, right? Who's going to do what next? Because that is the other thing parents will say, well, now the lasagnas have stopped coming in. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't hear from anybody. It's like everybody thinks that I just want to be left alone. So maybe the next thing is a phone call train, right? Who's going to check in this week?
And I love this one subject. On this subject, sorry, one of my clients said, I just love having messages to read, even though I'm not replying. So for you, the message, I know that we want to hear back and we want to know, like, was this good? We have our own expectations that we're going to hear. Thank you. Or like, that was helpful. It was so nice to hear from you. We need some reassurance that what we've done is okay. But please give them that grace that they might not have it in them to reply, but they still might love to hear that you're checking in, even though you don't hear anything back. Like, that's such a common response for parents, to just be overwhelmed. They don't want to be asked sometimes, how are you doing? Because like Carol said, sometimes they don't even know. They're like, I can't answer to that. So I don't want to have that conversation, but I love a message that says, hey, I was thinking of you. Sun is shining. Hope all is well. Checking in.
Exactly.
Is there anything else that you guys think we should be saying in the last 5 minutes here to our listeners, thinking how can it best support somebody in grief, whether that's a child or an adult?
I thought of something to go with creating space for kids. One parent told me that even as their child was dying recently, and now that a little time before bedtime, as their brother was dying, they created space to be the question time, or that this was the time that we're going to talk about your brother. If you have anything about what's happening to him, or anything that you need to know or wish or want to wonder about with us. And so that's something they continued after the brother died, having this dedicated time that maybe was about the brother or end of life or about grief, but maybe other things came up too. But having a little bit of a dedicated time that, as a parent, you can be present. You don't know how we're going to react as a parent, or you don't know when you'll have the brain capacity or the most emotional capacity to be there for your child. But maybe having this set time in the day can allow you to show up for your kids at that time. And the other thing with that too is kids do bring up questions at the most unopportune time, right when they get on the bus, right before bed, in the car, whatever. And I always suggest to parents or other caregivers to create this like be right back jar with a mason jar with, let the kid decorate it, that this is a jar that we can ask difficult questions that throughout the day, that on the bus, you want to know, where did my brother go that died? Or where did so-and-so go that died? Let's put it in the be right back jar. And then at that dedicated time at the end of the day, we'll open that together and have that space to talk about this.
That's amazing. Even for older children, I can see how those questions don't go unanswered to address them. Love it. Love that. Thank you, Katt. Carol, you were going to say something too.
Nothing as insightful as what Katt just said. What I would suggest is that in line with what we've been talking about, what's so important to families is that their child or baby is remembered, and that the family know that they were cared for and loved, and that they remain important. And so I would suggest for friends and family members, I'm notoriously terrible at remembering birthdays and holidays and events and important days for other people. I forgot my best friend's birthday this year. Yes, I did. And she waited a week before telling me.
Oh, nice.
So bad. So write it down. Ask the family member or parent, what would be important days that you would want to make sure that you remember your baby. And then when they tell you, so it could, because for everyone it's different. For some, in the example of perinatal loss, for some families, it's the day their baby was born, whether alive or still. For other parents, the due date remains really important. 1-year anniversaries, super important. So ask them what days they might feel they would really want to highlight the importance of their baby. Write it down and do something special for them on those days, right? Back to basics. Send the flowers. Bring the Starbucks over with some brownies and sit down. Not celiac brownies, whatever.
I love brownies, so find them gluten-free, please, and thank you. Yes. You mentioning this brought back something that is very hard for me even to talk about, but I think is super important that we do, because it just brought back a memory of feeling guilty. If you haven't experienced that, if you do have a child that is healthy, that didn't die, that they were friends with, like that guilt, how it stops you sometimes from showing up. The day Mateo was born, my husband's cousin also gave birth to her twins. The difference being that we were like months and months apart. And one of the twins didn't make it. And so now my son shares a birthday with her twins. And every birthday, she is the one who sends me a photo of the twin that's alive and says, happy birthday to our boys. All 3 were boys. And I've always, initially, especially at first as newborns, that she couldn't leave the hospital with her baby. And, and then she only had one to bring home. That there was so much guilt that would stop me sometimes from reaching out and saying, how is it going? I remember Loic, I want to say his name. I know he existed, because I had this major guilt that I had to, as you can hear in my voice, still feel so emotional about it, deal with. So how do you guys tell the people, like there might be relatives, that might have been your child's best friend who passed away, that they were, or maybe you two were pregnant at the same time, you happen to give birth to a healthy child and they happen to give birth to stillbirth. Is there anything that we should be telling people like me who may have experienced something?
Yeah, that's a great question. Mm-hmm. And that comes up a lot, right? Especially with the perinatal population, because people, generally speaking, we plan our pregnancies around each other. We plan to have mat leaves with our friends. Like this is like the lived experience. And it is a thing that where some families, some parents have a really hard time being around their friends with children. So I think the best thing that you can do is to name it, right? You can name it through text, you can name it through a phone call, but just to say to your friend, I understand that this might be really hard for you, and I want to meet you where you're at. Tell me what you need. I want to be here for you. I want to keep being your friend. If you can't see me right now because of my baby or my other children, I understand. We'll do it at your pace, and I'm going to keep checking in on you until, and we'll do this when you're ready. Best thing you can do.
I would have to agree. And in this case, I have let her do the leading. And I've had the conversation, like, you let me know what, I don't know what she felt, but all I knew is like the comparison that I was doing and how, although I felt so blessed, at the same time, I felt like guilt that I was so blessed. And so I think that verbalizing was important. It was not easy to do because you don't want to go there naturally. So I think that that's definitely important. Katt, did you have anything else to add to that?
Just like similarly to what Carol is saying, like siblings will, like, often parents express to us, if this is, I would say it happens a lot in the perinatal, but also all the communities that, they do like go somewhere and don't understand why someone else has a baby and they don't. Like, why didn't my baby live? And missing their sibling in those circumstances and seeing other playing with their friends and with the similar like play group, but their brother or sister isn't there. And that can be an emotional time for them. And I think that's, again, like what we've been talking about. Sometimes children don't have the developmental capacity to understand why that makes them uncomfortable. So having the ability to have this open dialogue with them to say like, I'm noticing that this is the first time we're playing with all of your cousins together or all of your friends together and your brother or sister isn't here. I'm wondering how that makes you feel, because I imagine it might be quite difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the point here is calling it what it is, verbalizing it, not just think about it, bring the big elephant in the room out into the open. Although it might feel like the last thing you want to do, it is the easiest thing to do. And family is not what they lived through. And so they like being given that permission. And from the coaching I do with especially perinatal loss, those moms definitely want to be asked before being like just thrown into a scenario with babies if they're not ready. They definitely rather be acknowledged. This must be hard. Do you want us? And they love that they get that window to say no without feeling judged or guilty as well, that they had to say no because they don't feel good going to that baby shower.
Or that they're hurting your feelings.
Exactly. When they're in hurt themselves. So I think that that's such a key point for anybody listening to remember. Ladies, we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, not only for being here, but for the work that you do that is so special and that you do so well. And every family that comes across you is incredibly lucky to have you in this very unfortunate path. I have heard them refer to you guys as angels on earth, and I can see why. I honestly think that you're just almost born to doing this work and do it so beautifully. So thank you. I appreciate you. And I know that our community appreciates you. And I wish upon you all the blessings because you're so deserving of them. So thank you.
Well, and we feel that way about you, Olga. And we will keep having you come to our groups. And please make sure that your community knows that Roger Neilson House, our program is available to any family in Ottawa who has lost a child. So that's Katt services, that's my services. So, and as well as we have a team of social workers providing older age loss support. So we are here to help. We're just an email or phone call away.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a great point to just leave them with. Perinatal loss and the loss of a child. How do they get to come to see you if they were not in the hospice care? What is the process to get to see you?
Yeah, we service anyone who has had a child death within all of Eastern Ontario region. So emails away, like the social workers' email addresses are on our website. So is mine. But also there's info@rogerneilsonhouse.ca, and then our admin person can kind of traject that over to the right people.
Yeah. We also offer grandparent support, important to note, because our grandparents are obviously grieving too. And parents can self-refer. It's that simple. Just send us an email.
Awesome. So we will make sure that in the show notes, that website is there. And if you guys think of other places, please send them to me prior to. go live, and then I can add that to our notes. Again, thank you so much. And I hope for you guys listening that this was helpful, and that if ever you need this information, you know how to pull this episode back and then just listen to it again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Confidence is about taking empowered action with consistency. If you are done wishing you had more confidence with fill out the blank, and if you're ready to put an end to the bully that lives inside your mind, I want to invite you to my next Detox the Mind 5-day workshop, where you will learn proven strategies to go from self-critical to self-confident. For $97, you get 5 days of live coaching calls with me, workbooks to go along with your lessons, and teachings that will literally transform your life. This workshop will break you free from the prison of your own thoughts. Our next workshop begins April 11th, and you can join the waiting list today. Head over to the show notes or my website and make sure you add your name so you can be notified as soon as we open for registrations. I hope to see you inside.